The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Cheyenne's main thoroughfare, spitting up a cloud of Wyoming dust that settled on everything like a judgment. Eliza Thornfield gripped the doorframe, steadying herself before stepping down. Her legs trembled, not from the journey, though 5 days of cramped seating and bad roads had left their mark, but from what came next. She scanned the street. Wooden storefronts, hitching posts, men in worn hats standing in clusters, watching the new arrivals with the bored curiosity of people who had nothing better to do. No Caleb. She'd memorized his description from the letters. Tall, dark beard, scar above his left eyebrow from a ranch accident. He'd write with careful penmanship, each letter promising something simple. A home. A partnership. A life that made sense. Not love. She'd never asked for that. Just a place to belong. The driver dropped her bag at her feet with a thud that seemed louder than it should have been. "That all you got, miss?" "It's enough," she said. He tipped his hat and climbed back up. The stagecoach lurched forward, wheels grinding against packed earth, leaving her standing alone with her worn leather bag and the sinking realization that Caleb Durham was not coming. Not yet, anyway. She told herself to wait. Men got delayed. Ranches had emergencies. Maybe he was dealing with a sick horse or a fence that needed mending. Maybe he'd be here within the hour, apologetic and ready to make things right. Eliza picked up her bag and walked toward the boarding house she'd seen advertised in one of Caleb's letters. Mrs. Cartwright's establishment. Clean rooms, reasonable rates, respectable clientele. The woman behind the desk looked her up and down with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent years sizing up travelers. "How long you staying?" "Just tonight," Eliza said. "I'm meeting someone." "Uh-huh." Mrs. Cartwright slid a key across the counter. "Room 4, upstairs, end of the hall. Payment up front." Eliza counted out the coins carefully. She didn't have much left after the journey. The room was small, but clean. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window that overlooked the street. She set her bag down and sat on the edge of the mattress, smoothing her skirt with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 2 hours passed, then 4. She watched the sun slide lower, painting the buildings in shades of amber and rust. Men finished their work and headed toward the saloon. Women hurried home with baskets. The street emptied. Still no Caleb. By the time darkness settled over Cheyenne, Eliza had stopped watching the window. She'd stopped expecting footsteps in the hallway or a knock at the door. She lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. Voices drifted up from downstairs. Laughter. The clink of glasses. She thought about her mother's face the day she'd announced her decision to come west. The disappointment. The resignation. The unspoken belief that Eliza was making a mistake born of desperation. Maybe she'd been right. Eliza closed her eyes and tried not to think about what came next. Morning arrived cold and unforgiving. Eliza washed her face in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, the only other one she owned, and went downstairs. Mrs. Cartwright was serving breakfast to a handful of boarders. She glanced up when Eliza entered. "Your gentleman friend find you?" "Not yet." The woman's expression shifted slightly. Not quite pity. Something harder. "You got a name for this man?" "Caleb Durham." One of the men at this table looked up. He was older, weathered, with the kind of face that had seen too many winters. "Durham?" Eliza turned toward him. "You know him?" The man exchanged a glance with his companion. "Knew him. He ran a small spread east of here. Sold it off about 2 months back. Heard he went to California." The room tilted. California. 2 months. Eliza gripped the back of a chair. "You're certain?" "Sure as I'm sitting here. Asked around about buying some of his equipment before he left. He was in a hurry. Didn't say much about why." The other man chuckled. "Probably got into some kind of trouble. Durham wasn't exactly known for making smart decisions." Mrs. Cartwright shot him a look, but the damage was done. Eliza felt the weight of their stares, the questions they weren't asking, the conclusions they were drawing. She'd come all this way for a man who'd left before she'd even boarded the stagecoach. "Thank you," she managed. Her voice sounded distant. Not quite hers. She walked out of the dining room and climbed the stairs to her room. Closed the door, sat on the bed. The silence pressed in from all sides. She didn't cry. Crying required energy she didn't have. Instead, she pulled out the letters. 6 of them, each one carefully folded and reread so many times the creases had begun to tear. They felt like lies now. Every promise, every word, lies written by a man who'd never intended to keep them. She should leave, go back east, admit defeat. But the truth was simpler and more brutal than that. She had nowhere to go. The life she'd left behind had closed the moment she'd stepped onto that stagecoach. She'd burned every bridge in a single act of desperate hope. And now she was stranded, mugged. By afternoon, the whispers had started. Eliza could feel them as she walked through town, searching for work, for options, for anything that might give her a foothold in this place. A woman alone, abandoned, unmarried. The ranch hands snickered when she passed. The women in the general store fell silent, their eyes following her with a mix of curiosity and contempt. One of them finally spoke as Eliza was leaving. "Shame about your situation." Eliza turned. The woman was middle-aged, wearing a clean apron and an expression that wasn't quite sympathetic. "I'm managing," Eliza said. "Are you?" The woman tilted her head. "You came here for Caleb Durham, didn't you? Saw you getting off the stage yesterday." "I did." "Well," the woman smoothed her apron. "He's gone, and you're here, alone." She paused, letting the weight of that word settle. "Might want to think about what that looks like." Eliza felt heat rise in her chest. Not embarrassment, anger. "What exactly does it look like?" The woman blinked, surprised. "I'm just saying, you're saying I should be ashamed, that I made a mistake, that I don't belong here." Eliza stepped closer. "Maybe you're right, but I didn't come all this way to be pitied by strangers who don't know the first thing about me." She walked out before the woman could respond. Her hands were shaking again, not from fear, from fury. She hated this town, hated the stairs, hated the way people looked at her like she was already broken. But most of all, she hated that part of her believed they were right. That evening, Eliza sat in the boarding house's small parlor, nursing a cup of weak tea and trying to figure out her next move. She had enough money for maybe 3 more nights. After that, she'd be forced to leave, whether she had a plan or not. The door opened and a man stepped inside. He was tall, taller than most men she'd seen in Cheyenne, with broad shoulders and the kind of stillness that suggested he didn't waste movement. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples. His eyes were pale, the color of winter sky. He didn't look at her right away, just walked to the desk, spoke quietly to Mrs. Cartwright, and took a key. But as he turned to leave, his gaze swept across the room and landed on Eliza. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he nodded, barely perceptible, and headed upstairs. Eliza exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Mrs. Cartwright appeared at her elbow. "That's Rowan Hale. Tracker, hunter. Keeps to himself mostly." She paused. "Heard he lives up in the mountains. Only comes down a few times a year for supplies." "Why are you telling me this?" The older woman shrugged. "No reason. Just thought you might want to know there are men in this world who don't run their mouths, don't make promises they can't keep." She walked away before Eliza could ask what she meant. The next morning, Eliza woke to the sound of voices outside her window. She pulled back the curtain and saw a small crowd gathering near the livery. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Mrs. Cartwright was standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "Trouble at the Rollins place. Mountain Lion took down 2 calves last night. They're putting together a hunting party." Eliza watched as men saddled horses and checked rifles. She recognized a few faces from town. Ranch hands, store owners, men who talked loudly and gestured with confidence. And then she saw him. Rowan Hale, standing apart from the others, checking his gear with quiet precision. One of the ranch hands called out to him. "You coming, Hale?" Rowan glanced up. "If you want the cat dead, yeah. Think pretty highly of yourself, don't you?" Rowan didn't smile. "Think highly of not wasting time." The ranch hand laughed, but it sounded forced. Eliza watched as they rode out, a loose formation of men who clearly didn't trust each other but needed the numbers. Rowan brought up the rear, his posture relaxed, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't look back. They returned 3 days later. Eliza heard the commotion from her room and went to the window. The hunting party was smaller now, only 5 men instead of the original 8. She hurried downstairs. Mrs. Cartwright was already outside, talking to one of the returning men. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he dismounted. "What happened?" someone asked. "Cat ambushed us in a canyon. Got Miller and Thompson before we even saw it coming." He swallowed hard. "Hale tracked it for 2 days, finally cornered it near the ridgeline, killed it with one shot." "Where is he now?" "Headed back to his cabin. Didn't even wait for payment." Eliza scanned the group, but Rowan was nowhere to be seen. That night, she lay awake thinking about the tracker who lived alone in the mountains. The man who didn't make promises, who didn't waste words. She thought about the way he'd looked at her that first night in the parlor. Not with pity, not with judgment, just recognition. Like he'd seen something in her that no one else had bothered to notice. 2 more days passed. Eliza's money ran out. Mrs. Cartwright knocked on her door early in the morning. "I'm sorry, dear, but I can't keep the room if you can't pay." "I understand." Eliza gathered her things. She'd already known this was coming. "Where will you go?" "I'll figure something out." The older woman hesitated. "There's a position at the saloon. They're looking for—" "No." Eliza cut her off. "Thank you, but no." She walked out with her bag and no plan. The morning was cold. Frost clung to the edges of buildings. Her breath plumed in the air. She sat on a bench outside the general store watching people move through their routines. No one looked at her. No one stopped. She was invisible now. Irrelevant. And then a shadow fell across her. She looked up. Rowan Hale stood there, his pale eyes steady. He didn't say anything at first, just studied her with the same careful attention he probably gave to tracks in the dirt. Finally, he spoke. "You got somewhere to be?" "No." He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. "You know how to ride?" "Not well." "Can you learn?" Eliza frowned. "Why?" "Because I'm offering you a place, up in the mountains. Cabin's got room, works hard, but you'll be safe." She stared at him. "You don't even know me. Don't need to." He shifted his weight, and for the first time she saw something almost uncomfortable in his expression. "Saw you that first night. Saw how people looked at you. Figured you deserved better than what this town had to offer." "Why would you help me?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because I know what it's like to be alone. And I know you're tougher than they think." Eliza's throat tightened. "How do you know that?" "Because you're still sitting here instead of running. That takes something most people don't have." She looked down at her hands, calloused from work back east, scarred from a life that had never been easy. When she looked back up, Rowan was still waiting. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "what happens?" "You work, you learn, you survive." He paused. "And when you're ready to leave, you leave. No strings." It wasn't a promise of comfort, or safety, or even kindness, but it was honest, and that was more than anyone else had offered. Eliza stood. "When do we leave?" "Now." What? They rode out of Cheyenne an hour later, Eliza on a borrowed horse that Mrs. Cartwright had somehow procured, her bag tied behind the saddle. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by distance and dust. Rowan didn't talk much, just pointed out landmarks occasionally, showed her how to adjust her grip on the reins, corrected her posture without making her feel stupid. The land changed as they climbed. Flat plains gave way to rolling hills. Hills became foothills. Foothills turned into mountains. The air grew thinner, colder. By the time the sun began to set, Eliza's legs ached and her hands were raw from gripping the reins. Rowan pulled up near a stand of pine trees. "We'll camp here tonight." Eliza slid off the horse and nearly fell. Her legs buckled and she had to grab the saddle to keep from hitting the ground. Rowan dismounted smoothly. "First day's always the hardest. How far did we come?" "Maybe 15 miles?" Eliza stared at him. "That's all?" "That's all." He started gathering wood for a fire. "We've got another 2 days before we reach the cabin." She wanted to cry, or scream, or collapse. Instead, she forced herself to stand upright. "What can I do to help?" Rowan glanced at her, and something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. "Find small branches, dry ones. We'll need kindling." She did. Her body protested every movement, but she didn't stop until she'd gathered an armful of wood and brought it back to where Rowan was building the fire. He nodded. "Good. That single word felt like a victory. They ate in silence, dried meat and hard biscuits that tasted like dust. Eliza forced herself to chew and swallow, even though her stomach was in knots. When the fire burned low, Rowan handed her a blanket. "Get some sleep. We leave at first light." She lay down near the fire, wrapped in the blanket, and stared up at the stars. They were brighter here, sharper. For the first time in days, Eliza felt something shift inside her. Not hope, exactly, but something close. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this. The second day was worse than the first. Every muscle in Eliza's body screamed. The horse seemed to sense her weakness and tested her constantly, veering off the trail or slowing to a stubborn walk. Rowan never commented, just adjusted his pace to match hers and kept moving. By midday, they'd climbed high enough that patches of snow appeared between the trees. Eliza's hands were numb, her face stung from the wind, but she didn't complain. Rowan stopped near a frozen stream. "We'll rest here." Eliza dismounted and immediately sat down, not trusting her legs to hold her. Rowan filled a canteen from the stream and handed it to her. The water was so cold it hurt her teeth. "You're doing better than I expected," he said. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a fact." Eliza almost smiled. "Well, thank you, I think." They rested for 20 minutes, then mounted up again. The trail grew steeper, narrower. At one point, Eliza looked down and realized they were riding along the edge of a drop so steep she couldn't see the bottom. Her heart hammered. "Don't look down," Rowan said calmly. "Look at the trail. Trust the horse." She forced herself to focus on the path ahead, gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles went white. They made it across. Eliza exhaled shakily. Rowan glanced back. "You all right?" "Define all right." He almost smiled. "You're still on the horse. That counts." Okay. They reached the cabin late on the third day. It sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, smoke rising from the chimney into the darkening sky. Eliza stared at it. "You left the fire going?" "Always do. Keeps the place from freezing solid." He dismounted and led his horse to a small lean-to shelter. Eliza followed, moving stiffly. Inside, the cabin was larger than she'd expected. One main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, shelves lined with supplies. A smaller room off to the side. A bedroom, she assumed. It was sparse, functional, but warm. Rowan set his gear down and started unpacking. "There's a cot in the corner. You'll sleep there for now." Eliza nodded, too tired to argue. She collapsed onto the cot and was asleep before Rowan even finished stoking the fire. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Rowan was at the stove, moving with practiced efficiency. He glanced over when she sat up. "There's water in the basin if you want to wash up." She did, grateful for the chance to scrub the grime from her face and hands. When she sat down at the table, Rowan set a plate in front of her. Bacon, eggs, and thick slices of bread. She ate without speaking, suddenly ravenous. When she finished, Rowan leaned back in his chair. "Here's how it works. You help with the daily work, cooking, cleaning, hauling water, chopping wood. I'll teach you what you need to know. Hunting, tracking, survival." "Why?" "Because if something happens to me, you need to be able to take care of yourself." Eliza looked at him. "You think something's going to happen to you?" "I think the mountains don't care about plans." He stood. "Come on, I'll show you around." Potem. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of hard work and exhaustion. Eliza learned to chop wood without blistering her hands, to haul water from the creek without spilling half of it, to build a fire that didn't smoke. Rowan was patient but exacting. He showed her once, then expected her to remember. She fell. A lot. Cut her hands, bruised her knees, dropped things. But she got back up. Every time. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, she began to change. Her hands grew calloused, her arms stronger, her reflexes sharper. One morning, Rowan handed her a rifle. "Time you learned to shoot." They spent the afternoon practicing. Eliza's shoulder ached from the recoil, and her ears rang from the noise, but by the end of the day, she could hit a target at 20 paces. Rowan nodded. "Good enough." Coming from him, it felt like high praise. Winter deepened. Snow piled high around the cabin. The world shrank to the clearing and the tree line and the smoke rising from the chimney. Eliza and Rowan fell into a routine. They spoke more now, brief exchanges about the work, about the weather, about small things that didn't matter much but somehow did. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Eliza asked the question she'd been holding on to for weeks. "Why did you really bring me here?" Rowan was quiet for a long time, then, "I told you. You deserved better. That's not the whole truth." He stared into the fire. "No, it's not." He exhaled slowly. "I've been alone for a long time. Chose it, preferred it. But watching you sit on that bench, I saw something I recognized." "What?" "Someone who'd been knocked down and refused to stay there." He looked at her then, his pale eyes steady. "I respect that. Figured you might respect the same thing in return." Eliza felt something tighten in her chest. "I do." They didn't say anything else, but the silence felt different now, less empty, more like understanding. The first real test came in late December. A storm rolled in fast, turning the sky black and dumping snow so thick Eliza couldn't see the tree line from the cabin door. Rowan went out to check the animals, 2 horses and a goat they kept for milk. He didn't come back. Eliza waited. 10 minutes, 20. Then she grabbed her coat and went after him. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet, snow stung her face, blinding her. She found him near the lean-to, struggling to fix a broken section of roof that had collapsed under the weight of the snow. "Get inside!" he shouted over the wind. "Not without you!" Together, they managed to prop up the roof long enough to secure it with rope. By the time they stumbled back into the cabin, they were both soaked and shivering. Rowan stripped off his coat and moved toward the fire. Eliza did the same, her hands shaking so badly she could barely undo the buttons. "You shouldn't have come out there," Rowan said. "You would have frozen." "I've handled worse." "So have I." She met his eyes. "I'm not helpless, Rowan." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "No, you're not." It was the closest thing to approval she'd ever heard from him, and it meant everything. As winter deepened and the snow piled higher, Eliza realized something she hadn't expected. She was happy. Not the fragile, fleeting kind of happiness that depended on circumstances aligning perfectly, but something deeper, something earned. She'd come west looking for a husband, for stability, for a life someone else had promised to build for her. Instead, she'd found something better. She'd found herself. And in the quiet spaces between chopping wood and hauling water, in the shared meals and the long silences by the fire, she'd found something else too. She'd found Rowan, not as a savior, not as a replacement for the life she'd lost, but as a partner, an equal. Someone who saw her not as broken or damaged or unworthy, but as strong. And that made all the difference. January came in cold and mean, the kind of cold that worked its way through every crack in the cabin walls and settled in your bones. Eliza woke before dawn most mornings now, her body adjusted to the rhythm of mountain life. She'd slip out of her cot quietly, careful not to wake Rowan, and start the fire, coaxing reluctant embers back to life. This morning was no different, except for the silence. Usually she could hear Rowan breathing from the other room, a steady sound that had become oddly comforting. But today there was nothing. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and padded across the cold floor to check. The bedroom was empty. His coat was gone. Eliza frowned and moved to the window. Dawn was just beginning to break, painting the snow-covered clearing in shades of gray and blue. She spotted tracks leading toward the tree line. Fresh ones, barely filled in by the light snow that had fallen during the night. He'd gone out early, probably checking the trap lines. She started breakfast anyway, figuring he'd be back soon. But an hour passed, then 2, and the bacon she'd fried was getting cold on the plate. Something felt wrong. Eliza pulled on her boots and coat, grabbed the rifle Rowan had taught her to use, and followed his tracks into the woods. The snow was deeper here, away from the clearing. It came up past her knees in places, making every step an effort. She kept her eyes on the tracks, following them through the pines until she heard it. A low growl that made her blood freeze. She stopped, gripping the rifle tighter. The tracks led to a small ravine about 50 yards ahead. She approached slowly, carefully, and peered over the edge. Rowan was down there, his back against the ravine wall, facing a wolf. Not just any wolf. This thing was massive, its gray coat matted with scars, its eyes fixed on Rowan with predatory focus. Rowan had his rifle aimed at the animal, but something was wrong with his stance. He was favoring his left leg, and Eliza could see dark blood staining the snow near his boot. "Easy," Rowan said, his voice low and steady. "Easy now." The wolf circled, testing him. Eliza raised her rifle, trying to get a clear shot, but Rowan was too close to the animal. If she missed— "Rowan!" she called out, keeping her voice calm. He didn't turn, didn't take his eyes off the wolf. "Get back to the cabin." "Not happening." "Eliza!" The wolf lunged. Rowan fired, but the shot went wide. The animal hit him hard, knocking him backward into the snow. Eliza didn't think. She just aimed and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the ravine. The wolf yelped and stumbled sideways, blood spreading across its shoulder. It turned toward her, snarling, and for a moment Eliza thought it might come for her instead. Then Rowan fired again. This shot didn't miss. The wolf collapsed, twitched once, and went still. Eliza scrambled down into the ravine, her heart hammering. "Are you hurt?" Rowan was already pushing himself up, wincing. "Twisted my ankle, stepped in a hole covered by snow." He glanced at the dead wolf, then at her. "Hell of a shot." "You taught me well." "Apparently." He tried to put weight on his injured leg and hissed through his teeth. "Let me see." "It's fine." "Rowan." He sighed and sat back down, letting her examine his ankle. It was already swelling, the skin tight and discolored. Not broken, she thought, but badly sprained. "Can you walk?" "Have to, don't I?" She helped him to his feet, letting him lean on her shoulder. They made it about 10 yards before he had to stop, his face pale and covered in sweat. "This isn't working," Eliza said. "Just need a minute." "You need more than a minute." She looked around, assessing. The cabin was at least a mile away, maybe more. "Wait here." "Where are you going?" "To get the horses." Eliza. But she was already climbing out of the ravine, moving as fast as she could through the deep snow. It took her nearly an hour to reach the cabin, saddle one of the horses, and ride back. By the time she returned, Rowan was shivering despite his coat. She helped him onto the horse and led it slowly back to the cabin, one hand on the reins, the other steadying him when he swayed. By the time they got inside, he was barely conscious. Eliza got him into bed and pulled off his boot as gently as she could. The ankle was worse now, swollen to nearly twice its normal size. She wrapped it tightly, remembering what Rowan had taught her about injuries. Elevation, ice if they had it, rest. Then she built up the fire and made strong coffee, forcing him to drink it even though his hands shook. "You should have left me," he said after a while, his voice rough. "And let you freeze? Don't be stupid. Could have gotten yourself killed." "So could you." She sat down on the edge of the bed. "We're even now." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Yeah, I guess we are." She stayed with him through the night, checking his ankle every few hours, making sure the swelling didn't get worse. He slept fitfully, waking occasionally to find her still there. "You don't have to do this," he said once. "I know." "Then why?" Eliza was quiet for a moment. "Because you did it for me, when no one else would." He didn't respond, but his hand found hers in the darkness and held on. The next few days were hard. Rowan couldn't put weight on his ankle, which meant all the daily work fell to Eliza. She chopped wood until her arms ached, hauled water until her back screamed, fed the animals and checked the trap lines and kept the fire going. At night, she collapsed into her cot too exhausted to think. But she didn't complain. Not once. On the 4th day, Rowan managed to hobble out of bed using a makeshift crutch he'd fashioned from a tree branch. "You should be resting," Eliza said. "Been resting. Going crazy." She watched him move carefully across the cabin floor, testing his weight. "How does it feel?" "Like hell. But I'll live." He sat down at the table, relief crossing his face. "Thanks to you. You would have done the same." "Maybe." He looked at her seriously. "But that doesn't make it less important." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. "Well, you're welcome." They fell back into their routines slowly. Rowan still couldn't do heavy work, so Eliza continued to handle most of it. But he taught her more now. How to read animal tracks in the snow, how to tell which trees would burn best, how to predict weather changes by watching the sky. One afternoon, while she was splitting wood, he called out from the cabin door. "You're putting too much shoulder into it. Use your hips." Eliza adjusted her stance and tried again. The log split cleanly. "Better," Rowan said. "I had a good teacher." "Stubborn student, though," she grinned. "Takes one to know one." He almost smiled. Almost. February brought a brief thaw, the snow melting just enough to reveal patches of frozen ground. Rowan's ankle had healed enough for him to walk without the crutch, though he still favored it. They were checking the trap lines together when Eliza spotted something unusual. Tracks that didn't belong to any animal she recognized. "Rowan." He came over, studying the marks in the mud. His expression darkened. "What is it?" "People. 3 of them, maybe 4. Came through here sometime in the last day or 2. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Who?" "Don't know. Could be trappers, could be drifters." He stood, scanning the tree line. "Could be trouble." They followed the tracks for a while, staying alert. The trail led east, away from the cabin, but Rowan didn't relax. "We need to be careful," he said. "If they're just passing through, fine. But if they're scouting for what? Cabins, supplies, easy targets." He looked at her. "Out here, people take what they can get. Law doesn't reach this far." Eliza's hand went to the rifle slung across her shoulder. "What do? We watch, we prepare, and we don't trust anyone who shows up unexpected." That night, Rowan barred the cabin door and kept his rifle close. Eliza did the same, sleeping in her clothes with her boots nearby. But no one came. The tracks disappeared after a few days, covered by fresh snow, and life returned to normal. Or as normal as it could be. Because something had shifted between Eliza and Rowan during those tense days of watching and waiting. They'd moved closer somehow, their partnership deepening into something neither of them had quite named yet. It showed in small ways. The way Rowan made sure her coffee was hot before handing it to her in the morning. The way Eliza checked his ankle without him asking, her hands gentle despite the calluses. The way they sat closer by the fire now, their shoulders almost touching. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Rowan spoke without looking at her. "You ever think about going back?" Eliza paused, dish in hand. "To Cheyenne?" "Anywhere. East. Wherever you came from." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "No, not anymore." "Why not?" "Because there's nothing there for me." She set the dish down and turned to face him. "Everything I need is here." Rowan met her eyes, and something passed between them. An understanding that went deeper than words. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know what you mean." They didn't speak after that, but they didn't need to. The silence said enough. March arrived with unpredictable weather, warm one day, freezing the next. The snow began to retreat in earnest, revealing muddy ground and the first hints of green beneath dead grass. Eliza was working in the small garden plot behind the cabin, preparing the soil for spring planting, when she heard voices. She stood quickly, mud-streaked and alert. 3 men emerged from the tree line on horseback. They looked rough, trail-worn and hard-eyed, with the kind of wariness that came from living outside civilization. Rowan was already at the cabin door, rifle in hand. The lead rider raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy there, friend. Just passing through." "Then keep passing," Rowan said. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's not very neighborly." "We're not neighbors." One of the other riders, younger and meaner looking, spat into the dirt. "Got yourself a woman up here. Cozy setup." Eliza felt anger flash through her, but she kept her expression neutral. Rowan's voice went cold. "Say that again." The young man grinned. "Just making an observation." The lead rider cut in quickly. "My friend here doesn't mean anything by it. We've been on the trail a long time. Forgot our manners." He looked at Rowan carefully. "We're looking for work. Heard there might be ranches hiring down in the valley." "There might be. Keep heading east." "Could use some supplies first. Water. Maybe some food. We can pay." Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then, "Wait here." He went inside and came back with a canteen and some dried meat wrapped in cloth. He tossed them to the lead rider. That's all you're getting. Now move on. The man caught the supplies and nodded slowly. Appreciate it. He turned his horse, then paused. You got a good thing here. Be a shame if anything happened to it. It wasn't quite a threat, but it was close. Rowan didn't flinch. Be a shame if anyone tried to make something happen. The men rode off without another word. Eliza waited until they were out of sight before walking over to Rowan. Do you think they'll come back? Maybe. Depends on how desperate they are. What do we do? Rowan looked at her, his jaw tight. We get ready. They spent the rest of the day reinforcing the cabin. Rowan showed Eliza how to bar the windows from inside, how to position furniture to create defensible angles. They moved extra ammunition inside and made sure both rifles were cleaned and loaded. You really think they'll try something? Eliza asked as they worked. I think men like that don't ride all the way up here just to ask for directions. He secured the last shutter. But whether they come back or not, we'll be ready. That night, they took turns keeping watch. Eliza sat by the window during her shift, rifle across her lap, listening to every sound outside. The darkness felt heavier now, full of potential threats. But nothing happened. Dawn came quiet and cold, and the men didn't return. Still, Rowan kept his rifle close for the next week, and Eliza found herself checking the tree line constantly. I hate this, she said one morning, feeling like we're waiting for something bad to happen. That's how you stay alive out here, Rowan said. You assume the worst and hope for better. Sounds like a hard way to live. It is. He looked at her. But you're tougher than you think, Eliza. You've already proven that. She wanted to believe him. Most days, she did. But doubt crept in during the quiet moments, whispering that maybe she wasn't as strong as everyone seemed to think, that maybe she'd just been lucky so far. As if reading her thoughts, Rowan spoke again. You killed that wolf, saved my life, got me back to the cabin when I couldn't walk. He paused. That's not luck. That's courage. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and sharp. I was terrified. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's doing what needs to be done anyway. He reached out and touched her shoulder briefly. You've got that. Don't doubt it. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The next few weeks passed in relative peace. Spring continued its slow arrival, the days growing longer and slightly warmer. Eliza planted seeds in the garden, potatoes, carrots, beans. Rowan taught her how to fish in the creek that ran behind the cabin, now swollen with snowmelt. One afternoon, as they were checking the trap lines, they found a young deer caught in one of the snares. It was still alive, struggling weakly. Rowan knelt beside it. We need to put it down, quick and clean. I'll do it, Eliza said. He looked at her, surprised. You sure? I need to learn. He showed her where to make the cut, how to hold the animal so it wouldn't suffer. Eliza's hands shook, but she did it. The deer went still. She sat back, breathing hard, tears streaming down her face. Rowan didn't tell her it was okay or that it got easier. He just helped her dress the carcass and carried it back to the cabin. That night, as they ate venison stew, he said, You did good today. It felt terrible. It should. That means you're not cruel. He set his bowl down. But you did what needed to be done. That matters. Eliza understood what he wasn't saying, that this life required hard choices, that survival meant doing things that hurt, that strength wasn't about never feeling pain, it was about carrying it and moving forward anyway. She was beginning to realize that she could do that. Maybe she'd been doing it all along. April brought warmer weather and longer days. The snow retreated to the highest peaks, and wildflowers began to appear in scattered patches of color. Eliza's garden was growing, tiny green shoots pushed up through the soil, fragile but determined. She felt the same way. One morning, she woke to find Rowan already outside, working on something near the lean-to. She pulled on her coat and went to investigate. He was building an addition to the shelter, more space for the animals and supplies. You could have asked for help, she said. Figured you earned a morning to sleep in. She picked up a hammer. Well, I'm awake now. They worked side by side through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Rowan measured and cut. Eliza hammered nails and held boards steady. At one point, she hit her thumb and swore loudly. Rowan glanced over. You all right? Fine, just clumsy. Happens to everyone. She sucked on her throbbing thumb. Does it happen to you? More than I'd like to admit. She laughed, and he smiled. A real smile, not the almost smile she usually got. It changed his whole face, made him look younger and less guarded. She wanted to see it more often. By afternoon, the addition was finished. They stood back, surveying their work. "Not bad," Rowan said. "Not bad at all." They went inside to clean up, and Eliza caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the wash basin. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was sun-browned and freckled. Her hair, once carefully styled, now hung in a simple braid. Her hands were rough and scarred, but her eyes were different, clearer, steadier. She looked like someone who could handle things, like someone who belonged here. That night, as they sat by the fire, Rowan asked her something he'd never asked before. "What was your life like before you came west?" Eliza was quiet for a moment, surprised by the question. "Ordinary, small town. My parents ran a dry goods store. I worked there most of my life." "Why'd you leave?" "My father died. My mother remarried within a year, a man who made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore." She stared into the flames. "I didn't have much choice. It was find a husband or end up in a factory somewhere." "So you answered Caleb's advertisement?" "I did. Seemed like the best option at the time." She glanced at him. "Turns out it wasn't." "No?" "No, the best option showed up later, on a street in Cheyenne, offering something nobody else thought to offer." Rowan looked at her, his pale eyes reflecting firelight. "What's that?" "A chance to prove myself." He was quiet for a long moment, then, "You've done that, and then some." Eliza felt warmth bloom in her chest, not from the fire, but from something deeper. "What about you?" she asked. "You never talk about your past." Rowan's expression closed off slightly. "Not much to tell." "I don't believe that." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "My family had a ranch, north of here. Lost it when I was 19. Bad winter, worse decisions. Everyone scattered. I went to the mountains because I didn't want to be around people anymore." "How long have you been up here?" 15 years, give or take." Eliza did the math. "That's a long time to be alone." "It was what I wanted." "Was?" He met her eyes. Things change. The air between them felt charged suddenly, heavy with something unspoken. Eliza's heart hammered. "Rowan?" A sharp crack echoed outside. They both froze. Rowan grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Eliza did the same, her pulse racing. Another crack, then shouting. "It's them," Rowan said quietly. "The men from before." Eliza's stomach dropped. "How many?" "Can't tell. At least 3. A voice called out from the darkness. "We know you're in there. Come out and nobody gets hurt." Rowan didn't respond. "We just want some supplies, food, ammunition, whatever you got. Hand it over and we'll leave." "Like hell, Rowan muttered. He glanced at Eliza. "You remember what we practiced?" She nodded, fear making her mouth dry. "Good. Stay low. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target." Another shot rang out, this one hitting the cabin wall. "Last chance," the voice shouted. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rowan aimed carefully through a gap in the shutters and fired. Someone screamed. All hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splintering wood. Eliza crouched low, her heart in her throat, waiting for Rowan's signal. "Window on your left," he shouted. She saw movement, a shadow trying to get closer to the cabin. She aimed and fired. The shadow dropped. More shots, more shouting. Rowan fired again, reloaded with practiced speed, fired once more. Then silence. They waited, barely breathing. "You killed 2 of my men!" the voice shouted, now sounding more distant. "This ain't over." "Then come back and finish it," Rowan called back. No response. They waited another hour, rifles ready, before Rowan finally moved away from the window. "I think they're gone." "For now," Eliza said, her voice shaking. He looked at her. "You did good. I shot someone. You defended yourself. Us." He set his rifle down and sat beside her. "That's different." Eliza's hands were trembling. She'd killed the wolf without hesitation because it was an animal. But this, it doesn't feel different, she whispered. Rowan didn't offer empty comfort, just sat with her in the darkness, his presence solid and steady. Eventually, Her shaking stopped. They stayed awake the rest of the night, taking turns watching, but the men didn't come back. At dawn, Rowan went outside carefully, rifle ready. Eliza followed. 2 bodies lay in the clearing, the men she and Rowan had shot. Rowan checked them quickly. Dead. What do we do with them? Bury them, away from the cabin. He looked grim. And then we figure out what to do about the one who got away. They spent the morning digging graves in the half-frozen ground. Hard, miserable work that left Eliza's muscles screaming. When it was done, they stood over the rough mounds. Should we say something? Eliza asked. Like what? I don't know, something. Rowan was quiet. Then, they made their choice. We made ours. That's all there is. It felt inadequate, but Eliza couldn't think of anything better. They walked back to the cabin in silence. That night, Rowan made a decision. We need to go to town. Why? Because that third man knows where we are. He might come back with reinforcements, or he might tell others. He looked at her seriously. Either way, we need supplies, ammunition, maybe information about who these men were. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning, early. Eliza nodded, dread settling in her stomach. She didn't want to go back to Cheyenne, didn't want to face the people who'd judged her, who'd looked at her with pity and contempt. But Rowan was right. They didn't have a choice. That night, as she lay in her cot trying to sleep, she thought about how much had changed since she'd first arrived in this territory. She'd come looking for safety and found danger instead. She'd come looking for easy answers and found hard questions. But she'd also found strength she didn't know she had. And she'd found Rowan. Whatever waited for them in Cheyenne, they'd face it together. That would have to be enough. They left before sunrise, the air still sharp with night cold. Eliza sat rigid in the saddle, her rifle strapped across her back, every muscle tense. The journey down from the mountains felt different this time. Not like an escape, but like walking into something she couldn't control. Rowan rode ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. He hadn't said much since they'd buried the 2 men, and Eliza hadn't pushed. Some silences were better left alone. By midday, they'd descended far enough that the landscape began to flatten out. The pines gave way to scrub brush and open ground. In the distance, Eliza could see the faint outline of Cheyenne against the horizon. Her stomach knotted. We'll get what we need and leave, Rowan said, as if sensing her thoughts. No reason to stay longer than necessary. What if someone recognizes me? Let them. He glanced back at her. You're not the same woman who left. They'll see that. Eliza wanted to believe him, but doubt crawled through her chest anyway. They reached Cheyenne just after 2 in the afternoon. The town looked exactly as she remembered. Dusty streets, weathered buildings, people moving about their business with the same tired determination. Rowan led them to the livery stable first, arranging for the horses to be fed and watered. The stable hand, a young man with a crooked nose, stared at Eliza a little too long. Something on your mind? Rowan's voice was flat, dangerous. The kid's eyes snapped away. No, sir. Just getting the horses settled. They walked toward the general store, and Eliza felt the weight of eyes on her. A woman sweeping her porch stopped to stare. 2 men outside the saloon nudged each other and whispered. Eliza kept her head up, her shoulders back. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Inside the store, the owner, a balding man named Fletcher, looked up from behind the counter. His eyebrows rose when he saw her. Miss Thornfield, heard you'd gone up to the mountains. You heard right. Fletcher's gaze shifted to Rowan, then back to Eliza. Didn't expect to see you again. Life's full of surprises. She pulled out the list they'd made. We need these supplies. Can you fill the order? He took the paper, scanning it. Most of it, yeah. Ammunition might take a day or 2. Been a run on it lately. Why? Rowan asked. Fletcher shrugged. Trouble up north. Some ranches got hit by bandits a few weeks back. People are nervous. Rowan and Eliza exchanged a glance. These bandits, Rowan said carefully. What do they look like? Don't know specifics. Sheriff might, though. Fletcher set the list down. You thinking they're the same ones causing you problems? Maybe. Well, Sheriff Dawson's been looking for information. Might want to talk to him. Eliza didn't like the idea of involving the law, but Rowan nodded. We'll do that. When can you have our supplies ready? Tomorrow morning. Early. Good enough. They left the store and headed toward the sheriff's office. The building was small, barely more than a shack with bars on the windows. Inside, a man in his 50s sat behind a desk covered in papers. He looked up when they entered, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to interest. "Help you?" "Sheriff Dawson?" Rowan asked. "That's me." "Name's Rowan Hale. This is Eliza Thornfield. We've got a cabin up in the mountains. Had some trouble a few days ago." Dawson leaned back in his chair, studying them. "What kind of trouble?" Rowan told him about the men who'd come to the cabin, the gunfight, the 2 bodies they'd buried. He kept it factual, emotionless. When he finished, Dawson was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and pulled a piece of paper from a drawer. "These men match any of these descriptions?" Rowan looked at the paper. "Hard to say. We didn't get a good look at all of them." "Well, I've got reports of a gang operating in the territory, 4, maybe 5 men. They've hit 3 ranches so far, took supplies, roughed up a couple of ranch hands. One of the victims said the leader had a scar running down his jaw." He tapped the paper. "That ring any bells?" Eliza closed her eyes, remembering the lead writer. "Yes, the man who spoke to us had a scar like that." Dawson nodded grimly. "Then you're lucky to be alive. This gang doesn't usually leave witnesses." "They left one of their own behind," Rowan said. "He got away. Which means he'll likely regroup. Maybe come back with more men." Dawson sat down again, rubbing his face. "I can send a deputy up to your place. Keep an eye on things for a few days. Appreciate the offer, but we can handle ourselves." "I don't doubt it. You killed 2 of them after all. But these men are dangerous. If they come back in force, then we'll deal with it." Rowan's tone left no room for argument. Dawson studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, but if things go south, you send word. Understood?" "Understood." They left the sheriff's office and walked toward the boarding house. Eliza's nerves were frayed, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. "You think they'll come back?" she asked quietly. "I think men like that don't forget when someone kills their friends." Rowan looked at her. "But we've got time to prepare. And we're not helpless." Mrs. Cartwright was behind the desk when they entered the boarding house. Her eyes widened when she saw Eliza. "Well, I'll be. Eliza Thornfield. Never thought I'd see you again." "Mrs. Cartwright," Eliza managed a small smile. "We need a room for the night." The older woman's gaze flicked to Rowan, then back to Eliza. Something like approval crossed her face. "1 room or 2? Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. 2. "Suit yourself." Mrs. Cartwright handed over 2 keys. "Rooms 6 and 7, upstairs." As they climbed the stairs, Eliza could feel the woman's eyes on them, assessing, judging. Let her think what she wants, Eliza thought. I don't owe her explanations. They dropped their things in their respective rooms and met back downstairs. The sun was setting, painting the street in shades of orange and gold. "We should eat," Rowan said. "There's a place down the street that's decent." The restaurant was small and crowded, filled with the smell of cooking meat and the low hum of conversation. They found a table in the back corner, and Eliza kept her eyes on the menu, trying to ignore the stares. A waitress approached, young, pretty, with curious eyes. "What can I get you?" Rowan ordered for both of them, his voice polite but distant. The waitress lingered a moment longer than necessary, clearly hoping for more conversation, then left when it became clear none was coming. Eliza couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. "What?" Rowan asked. "Nothing, just, she was trying to get your attention." "I noticed." And I'm not interested." He looked at her steadily. "Haven't been for a long time." Eliza's heart skipped. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to push the conversation into territory they'd been carefully avoiding, but the waitress returned with their food before she could. They ate in silence, the noise of the restaurant filling the space between them. When they finished, Rowan paid, and they stepped back out into the cool evening air. "I need to check on something," Rowan said. "You all right getting back to the boarding house on your own?" Eliza nodded, though unease prickled at the back of her neck. "I'll be fine. Stay alert, and if anyone bothers you, I know, scream loud and shoot first." He almost smiled. "Something like that." She watched him walk toward the saloon, then turned and headed back toward the boarding house. The streets were quieter now, most people having gone home for the evening. She was halfway there when she heard footsteps behind her. Eliza's hand went to the knife she kept tucked in her belt, a habit Rowan had taught her. She didn't turn around, just kept walking, her senses on high alert. The footsteps quickened. She spun, knife out, and found herself face to face with a woman she vaguely recognized. Middle-aged, wearing a faded dress and a pinched expression. The woman from the general store, the one who'd spoken to her months ago. "Easy," the woman said, raising her hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you following me?" "Because I wanted to apologize." The woman shifted uncomfortably. "What I said to you before when you first came to town, it wasn't kind, and it wasn't fair." Eliza lowered the knife slightly but didn't put it away. "Why the change of heart?" "Because I've been watching you. Heard about what happened up in the mountains. Heard you fought off bandits, killed 2 of them." The woman's expression was grudging, but honest. "Takes guts to do that. More than I've got, that's for sure." Eliza didn't know what to say. "Anyway," the woman continued, "I just wanted you to know, you're tougher than any of us gave you credit for." She turned and walked away before Eliza could respond. Eliza stood there for a moment, knife still in hand, trying to process what had just happened. Then she tucked the weapon back into her belt and continued toward the boarding house. Inside her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. The woman's words echoed in her mind, mixing with everything else she'd been feeling. She wasn't the same person who'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago. That woman had been lost, desperate, looking for someone else to save her. The woman she'd become didn't need saving. She'd learned to save herself. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Rowan standing there, his expression troubled. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside and he entered, closing the door behind him. "What's wrong?" "I talked to some people at the saloon, asked around about that gang." He sat down heavily in the chair by the window. "It's worse than we thought." "How much worse?" "They've got at least 6 men now, maybe more. And they're not just hitting ranches anymore. They're targeting anyone they think has something worth taking." Eliza's stomach dropped. "So they will come back?" "Almost certainly." He looked at her, his pale eyes serious. "We need to make a decision, Eliza. We can stay up at the cabin and fight, or we can find somewhere else. Somewhere safer." "You mean leave?" "I mean not die for a piece of land." Eliza was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she spoke, her voice steady. "That cabin isn't just a piece of land. It's home. It's everything we've built. It's not worth your life. Maybe not. But running isn't either." She met his gaze. "I didn't come this far just to give up when things get hard." Rowan studied her, something shifting in his expression. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded slowly. "Then we prepare. We turn that cabin into something they can't break into. And if they come, we make them regret it." "How?" "I've got some ideas, but we'll need more supplies and time." "How much time do you think we have?" "A week, maybe 2 if we're lucky." Eliza took a breath. "Then we'd better get started." They talked late into the night, planning, strategizing. Rowan sketched out ideas for fortifying the cabin, reinforcing the walls, creating firing positions, stockpiling ammunition and food. By the time he left, Eliza's head was spinning with details, but she felt something else too. Purpose. Clarity. She wasn't running anymore. She was fighting. The next morning, they collected their supplies from Fletcher and loaded everything onto the horses. The store owner watched them with concern. "You two be careful up there," he said. "We will," Eliza replied. They rode out of Cheyenne before noon, the town shrinking behind them as they climbed back into the mountains. The journey felt faster this time, driven by urgency and determination. When they reached the cabin, Rowan immediately started work. He showed Eliza how to reinforce the window shutters with extra planks, how to stack heavy furniture against the walls to absorb bullets, how to create firing slits that gave them a clear view of anyone approaching. They worked from dawn until dark, pausing only to eat and rest briefly. Eliza's hands blistered and bled, but she didn't stop. On the 3rd day, Rowan started digging. "What are you doing?" Eliza asked. "Creating obstacles, trenches, hidden pits, anything to slow them down if they come at night." She grabbed a shovel and joined him. By the end of the week, the cabin had transformed. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Every window was fortified. Every approach was covered. They'd stocked enough food and water to last a month if necessary. Rowan stood back, surveying their work. It's not perfect, but it'll do. You think it'll be enough? I think we've done everything we can. He looked at her. The rest is up to fate. That night, as they sat by the fire, Eliza asked the question that had been nagging at her for days. Why are you doing this, Rowan? Really? He was quiet for a long moment. What do you mean? You could leave. Go deeper into the mountains, somewhere they'd never find you. You've lived alone before. You could do it again. I could. So why stay? He stared into the flames, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Because I'm tired of running, tired of being alone. He looked at her then, and she saw something raw in his eyes. And because the thought of losing you is worse than the thought of dying. Eliza's breath caught. I know I'm not easy, he continued. I know I don't say the right things or make grand gestures, but you've become... He stopped, struggling with the words. You matter, Eliza, more than anything else in my life. And I'd rather fight beside you than live safely without you. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Rowan, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. She crossed the space between them and took his hand. You matter to me too, more than I thought possible. He looked down at their joined hands, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. When this is over, we'll figure out what comes next, together. He nodded, and she saw relief wash over his face. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to embers. The attack came 3 nights later. Eliza woke to the sound of breaking glass. She was out of her cot in seconds, rifle in hand, heart pounding. Rowan was already at the window, peering through one of the firing slits. They're here. At least 8 of them. Eliza took her position at the opposite window, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her. A voice called out from the darkness. We know you're in there. Come out and we'll make this quick. It was the same voice from before, the leader with the scar. Rowan didn't respond, just watched and waited. Your choice, the voice shouted. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. A bottle crashed through the window Eliza was guarding, flames erupting as it shattered on the floor. Fire! She screamed. Rowan was already moving, grabbing a bucket of sand they'd prepared and dumping it on the flames. The fire hissed and died, leaving smoke and the acrid smell of burning oil. More bottles came flying, more fires. They worked frantically, putting them out one after another, but the smoke was building, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. We need to get out, Rowan said, coughing. Where? The root cellar. It's got a tunnel that leads to the creek. I built it years ago as an escape route. He'd never mentioned it before, but Eliza didn't question. They grabbed what they could, rifles, ammunition, water, and Rowan led her to a hidden trapdoor beneath the kitchen floorboards. The cellar was small and dark, the air cool and damp. Rowan pulled the door shut above them just as she heard footsteps inside the cabin. Search it, someone shouted. Make sure they're not hiding. Eliza held her breath, her rifle pointed at the trapdoor. Footsteps crossed directly overhead. Something crashed, glass shattered. Then, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the footsteps retreated. Burn it, the leader's voice said. Burn it all. Rowan grabbed Eliza's arm and pulled her toward the back of the cellar. She could see the tunnel entrance now, barely wide enough for one person. Go, he whispered. I'll be right behind you. She crawled into the tunnel, the walls pressing in on all sides. Behind her, she heard Rowan following, his breathing harsh in the confined space. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, dirt raining down from above with every movement. Eliza's lungs burned from the smoke she'd inhaled, and her arms shook from dragging herself forward, but she didn't stop. Finally, she saw light ahead. She pushed through the opening and emerged near the creek, gasping for air. Rowan came out a moment later, covered in dirt and breathing hard. Behind them, flames lit up the night sky. The cabin was burning. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought to protect, gone. Eliza felt something break inside her, grief and rage mixing into a feeling so intense she couldn't name it. We need to move, Rowan said, his voice hoarse. They might search the area. She nodded numbly and let him lead her deeper into the woods, away from the flames, away from what had been their home. They walked for hours, putting distance between themselves and the burning cabin. Finally, when Rowan judged they were far enough, they stopped in a small clearing. Eliza sank to the ground, her whole body shaking. Rowan sat beside her, his arm going around her shoulders. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not being able to protect it. Protect you." "You did protect me. We're alive." She looked at him, seeing her own exhaustion reflected in his face. "That's what matters." "Is it? We've lost everything." "No." She took his hand. "We haven't lost each other." He pulled her close, and she let herself cry against his chest, all the fear and anger and grief pouring out. When she finally stopped, he was still holding her, his chin resting on top of her head. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We survive, like we always do." He pulled back to look at her. "And then we make them pay." Eliza felt something harden in her chest. "How?" "We go to the sheriff, tell him what happened, get a posse together, and hunt these bastards down." "You think Dawson will help?" "After this? He'd better." They spent the rest of the night in the clearing, taking turns keeping watch. When dawn broke, they started the journey back to Cheyenne. Eliza looked back once, seeing smoke still rising from where the cabin had been. Then she turned forward and didn't look back again. The past was gone. What mattered now was what came next. They reached Cheyenne just after midday, exhausted and filthy, reeking of smoke. People stopped to stare as they rode down the main street, whispers following in their wake. Eliza didn't care anymore what anyone thought. She was beyond caring about gossip or judgment or propriety. Sheriff Dawson was standing outside his office when they arrived, talking to a ranch hand. He took one look at them and his expression darkened. "What happened?" Rowan dismounted, moving stiffly. "The gang came back, burned us out." "When?" "Last night. We barely made it out." Dawson's jaw tightened. "How many were there?" "At least 8. Could have been more." Rowan's voice was flat, drained. "We need to put together a posse, track them down before they hit someone else." The sheriff was quiet for a moment, his eyes moving between Rowan and Eliza. Then he nodded. "Come inside, tell me everything." They spent the next hour going over every detail: the attack, the fires, the tunnel escape. Dawson took notes, asking questions, his face growing grimmer with each answer. When they finished, he set his pencil down. "I'll put the word out. See who's willing to ride. But I'll be honest with you, Hale. Most folks around here aren't eager to go hunting bandits. They've got families, businesses, they're scared. So we let these men keep terrorizing people?" Eliza's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Let them burn and steal and kill without consequences?" Dawson looked at her, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "I didn't say that. I'm just telling you how it is. Fear makes people cautious." "Fear should make them angry," she shot back. "Maybe, but anger doesn't always translate to action." Rowan put a hand on Eliza's shoulder. "We understand, Sheriff. Just do what you can." They left the office and headed toward the boarding house. Mrs. Cartwright took one look at them and shook her head. "You two look like you've been through hell." "Close enough," Rowan said. "I'll draw you a bath, both of you, and get some food sent up." The older woman's expression softened. "On the house?" Eliza managed a tired smile. "Thank you." Upstairs, Eliza sank into the hot water and scrubbed away days' worth of grime and smoke. Her muscles ached, her hands were blistered, and she had bruises she didn't remember getting. But she was alive. They both were. That had to count for something. After she dressed in clean clothes, the only spare set she had left, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Rowan standing there, his hair still damp from his own bath. "Can we talk?" She stepped aside and let him in. He moved to the window, staring out at the street below. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about what happens next. And I think you should stay here, in town." Eliza felt her chest tighten. What are you talking about?" "This gang, they're not going to stop. And when we go after them, it's going to be dangerous. More dangerous than anything we've faced so far." He turned to look at her. "I can't protect you and fight them at the same time." "I don't need you to protect me." "Eliza, no." She crossed the room to stand in front of him. "I've fought beside you. I've killed to defend us. I'm not some delicate thing that needs to be tucked away for safekeeping. I know that, but this is different. How? How is it different? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear on his face. Because if something happens to you, I won't survive it, and I can't think clearly if I'm worried about you getting shot. Eliza felt anger surge through her, hot and sharp. So your solution is to leave me behind? To make me sit here and wait while you ride off to possibly get killed? I'm trying to keep you safe. I don't want to be safe. The words came out louder than she intended. I want to fight. I want to make them pay for what they did. And I want to be there when it happens. Rowan stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You really mean that? Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right. But you follow my lead, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments. Same goes for you. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Deal. The tension between them eased slightly, and Eliza realized how close they were standing. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the worry lines around his mouth. Rowan, she said softly, what you said before about not being able to survive losing me, I meant it. I feel the same way. He reached up and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. When this is over, we build again. Somewhere new. Somewhere better. Together? Together. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and tentative, like he was afraid she might pull away. But Eliza leaned into it, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, anchoring herself to him. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. I should go, Rowan said, his voice rough. Let you rest. Or you could stay. He looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. You sure? I'm sure. He stayed. They lay on the narrow bed, fully clothed, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. They didn't talk. Didn't need to. Just held each other in the fading light, finding comfort in the simple fact of being alive and together. Eliza drifted off to sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling safer than she had in days. The next morning, Sheriff Dawson knocked on Rowan's door early. Eliza was already awake, having slipped back to her own room before dawn to avoid gossip. She heard voices in the hallway and opened her door to find Dawson talking to Rowan. I've got 5 men willing to ride, the sheriff was saying. Not as many as I'd hoped, but it's something. Who? Rowan asked. Tom Hendricks, Jack Morrison, the Cole brothers, and a tracker named Sam Weaver. Good men. All of them. Experienced. When do we leave? Soon as you're ready. I sent word to the other ranches that got hit. They're meeting us at the Rollins place in 2 hours. Rowan glanced at Eliza. We'll be there. Dawson's eyes narrowed. She's coming with us? Yes. Hale, I don't think she's a better shot than half the men you've got, and she's already proved she can handle herself in a fight. Rowan's tone left no room for argument. She comes or I don't. The sheriff studied Eliza for a long moment. Then he sighed. Fine, but she stays near the back. I'm not explaining to folks how a woman got killed on my watch. I can explain it myself if necessary, Eliza said coolly, and I'll ride wherever I'm needed. A hint of a smile crossed Dawson's face. Fair enough, 2 hours. Don't be late. They gathered their gear and headed to the livery. The stable hand from before was there, and he looked nervous when he saw them. Heard you're going after that gang, he said, saddling their horses. Word travels fast, Rowan replied. Yeah, well, people are talking. Some think you're brave, others think you're crazy. What do you think? The kid shrugged. I think you've got more guts than sense, but I hope you kill every last one of them. They rode out to the Rollins Ranch, where the rest of the posse was gathering. Eliza counted 8 men total, including Dawson and Rowan. Not a large group, but they looked capable, weathered, hard-eyed men who knew how to handle weapons. Tom Hendricks, a rancher in his 40s with a thick beard, gave Eliza a long look. This the woman who killed 2 of those bastards? It is, Rowan said. Hendricks nodded slowly. Good. We need all the gun hands we can get. The tracker, Sam Weaver, was a lean man with native features and sharp eyes. He'd already found the gang's trail, he explained, leading northeast toward rougher country. They're moving fast but not covering their tracks well, Sam said. Means they're confident, think nobody's coming after them. They're wrong, Dawson said. He addressed the group. We ride hard, we ride smart. We don't take unnecessary risks, and we bring these men to justice, dead or alive. I don't much care which. There was a murmur of agreement. They set out at a steady pace, following the trail Sam had found. The land grew rougher as they climbed, the vegetation sparse, the ground rocky and unforgiving. Eliza rode near the middle of the group, hyper-aware of everything around her. The weight of the rifle across her back, the sound of hooves on stone, the taste of dust in her mouth. She thought she'd be afraid, but instead she felt something else. Clarity, purpose. This was right. She knew it in her bones. By late afternoon, Sam called a halt. He'd found something, a campsite, recently abandoned, ashes still warm in the fire pit. They're close, he said. Maybe an hour ahead. Dawson gathered the group. We need to be smart about this. They'll have sentries posted if they've stopped for the night. We can't just ride in blind. So what's the plan? One of the Cole brothers asked. We wait until dark. Move in on foot. Take them by surprise. They found cover in a rocky outcropping and settled in to wait. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of red and purple. Eliza checked her rifle for the third time, making sure everything was in order. Rowan sat beside her, his expression unreadable. You all right? She asked quietly, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. That's cheerful. I'm being realistic. Well, stop it. We need to focus on how it goes right. He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. How'd you get so damn brave? I learned from the best. He took her hand and squeezed it once, then let go. When darkness fell, they moved out on foot, leaving the horses tied in the outcropping. Sam led the way, moving silently through the rocks and scrub brush. After about 20 minutes, they saw a firelight ahead. Voices carried on the still air, rough laughter, the clink of bottles. The gang had set up camp in a shallow canyon, confident and careless. Eliza counted 9 men around the fire, more than they'd expected. Dawson signaled for everyone to get into position. They spread out, forming a loose semicircle around the camp. Eliza found herself between Rowan and Tom Hendricks, her heart hammering. The sheriff waited until everyone was ready, then called out, "This is Sheriff Dawson. You're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and surrender." For a moment, there was shocked silence. Then all hell broke loose. The bandits scattered, grabbing weapons, diving for cover. Gunfire erupted from both sides, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness. Eliza aimed carefully and fired. One of the bandits dropped. Beside her, Rowan was firing methodically, his face set in grim concentration. The fight was chaotic, smoke and noise and screaming. Eliza lost track of time, just kept firing, reloading, firing again. Then she saw him, the leader with the scar, running toward a cluster of horses. "Rowan!" she shouted, pointing. He saw the man and took off running. Eliza followed without thinking. The leader mounted and kicked his horse into a gallop. Rowan fired, but missed. The horse disappeared into the darkness. "Damn it!" Rowan lowered his rifle, breathing hard. Behind them, the gunfire was dying down. Eliza turned and saw several bodies on the ground. The rest of the gang had either surrendered or fled. Dawson approached, his face grim. "We got 6 of them. 3 dead, 3 captured. The rest got away." "Including their leader," Rowan said bitterly. "We'll track him, but first we need to secure these prisoners and tend to our wounded." "Anyone hurt bad?" "Jack Morrison took a bullet in the shoulder. He'll live, but he needs a doctor." They spent the next hour binding the prisoners and gathering weapons. The 3 captured bandits were sullen and silent, refusing to answer questions. As they prepared to head back, Sam approached Dawson. "I can track the ones who got away. Pick up their trail at first light." "Do it. Take Rowan with you if he's willing." Rowan looked at Eliza. "You should go back with the main group." "Not a chance. Eliza. We've been through this. Where you go, I go." He sighed but didn't argue further. They made camp a safe distance from the canyon and took turns keeping watch. Eliza sat with her back against a rock, rifle across her lap, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tom Hendricks settled down nearby. "You did good tonight." "Thanks." "I mean it. Not many women could handle what you just did." "I'm starting to think there's not much difference between men and women when it comes to fighting. Fear feels the same, courage too." He was quiet for a moment. "Maybe you're right. My wife, she'd probably agree with you. She's tougher than I am, if I'm being honest. Eliza smiled slightly. Most women are. They just don't always get the chance to prove it. At dawn, they split up. Dawson led the main group back toward Cheyenne with the prisoners and wounded. Sam, Rowan, and Eliza headed deeper into the rough country, following the tracks of the men who'd escaped. The trail led through narrow canyons and across dry creek beds. Sam moved with quiet confidence, reading signs in the dirt that Eliza couldn't even see. By midday, they'd closed the distance. Sam pointed to fresh droppings on the trail. An hour ahead, maybe less. They moved more carefully now, staying alert for ambush. The trail led into a box canyon with high walls and limited exits. Sam stopped and frowned. This doesn't make sense. Why would they trap themselves? Because they're waiting for us, Rowan said grimly. As if in answer, gunfire erupted from above. Bullets ricocheted off rocks near Eliza's head. She dove for cover, her heart in her throat. Up on the rim, Sam shouted. Eliza looked up and saw 3 figures silhouetted against the sky. She fired, and one of them dropped. The others ducked back. We're sitting ducks down here, Rowan said. We need to get to higher ground. They scrambled up the canyon wall, using rocks and scrub for cover. Bullets kicked up dirt around them. Eliza's hands were shaking, but she kept moving, kept climbing. They made it to a ledge about halfway up and took cover behind a boulder. From here they could see the bandits' position better, a natural fortress of rocks near the canyon rim. We're outnumbered and outpositioned, Sam said. This was a trap. Then we spring it back on them, Rowan replied. He studied the terrain. See that gap in the rocks to the left? If we can get through there, we can flank them. That's a lot of open ground to cover. You got a better idea? Sam shook his head. Then let's move. Eliza, you provide covering fire. Keep their heads down. What if they shoot you? Then you make sure they don't live to celebrate. Before she could argue, he and Sam were moving, staying low, using every bit of cover available. Eliza started firing, aiming for the rocks where the bandits were hiding. She didn't expect to hit anyone, just wanted to keep them pinned. It worked for about 30 seconds. Then one of the bandits leaned out and fired. The bullet hit the boulder inches from her head, spraying rock chips into her face. She flinched back, temporarily blinded. When her vision cleared, she saw Rowan and Sam had made it to the gap. They were climbing toward the bandits' position. She kept firing, her shoulder aching from the rifle's recoil. Then she heard a scream. One of the bandits tumbled from the rim, falling 30 feet to the canyon floor. Rowan appeared at the top, silhouetted against the sky. He fired twice more. Silence. Eliza waited, barely breathing. Clear, Rowan called down. She climbed up to join them, her legs shaking. At the top, she found 2 bodies. The leader with the scar wasn't among them. Where is he? She asked. Sam pointed to tracks leading away from the rim. Ran, again. Rowan's face was dark with fury. How many lives does this bastard have? They followed the tracks for another hour, but the trail eventually disappeared into rocky ground that showed no prints. The leader had escaped. Again. They made their way back to where they'd left the horses and started the long ride back to Cheyenne. The mood was grim. They'd won. 9 bandits dead or captured out of a gang of maybe 15, but it didn't feel like victory. Not when the one who mattered most had gotten away. By the time they reached town, it was late evening. Word of the fight had already spread. People gathered in the street, asking questions, wanting details. Dawson met them at the sheriff's office. You get him? No, Rowan said flatly, but we got his men. What's left of them, anyway? That'll have to be enough for now. The prisoners are talking, trying to cut deals. We've got enough to charge them with murder, robbery, arson. They'll hang. Eliza should have felt satisfaction at that. Instead, she just felt tired. They said goodbye to Sam, who headed off to collect his payment. Rowan and Eliza walked to the boarding house in silence. Inside her room, Eliza sat on the bed and stared at the wall. Her hands were still shaking, adrenaline refusing to leave her system. Rowan sat beside her. You all right? I don't know. Are you? No. They sat in silence for a while. Then Eliza spoke. What do we do now? I don't know that either. The cabin's gone. That life is gone. Yeah. So where does that leave us? Rowan took her hand. It leaves us figuring out what comes next. Together, like you said. What if I don't know what comes next? Then we figure it out as we go. He looked at her seriously. All I know for sure is that I want you in my life, however that looks, wherever that takes us. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Even after everything? Especially after everything. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her. They stayed like that as darkness fell outside, holding each other in the quiet, neither of them having answers but finding comfort in the questions they were willing to face together. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Eliza was having breakfast in the boarding house dining room when Mrs. Cartwright approached with an envelope. This came for you. Courier brought it about an hour ago. Eliza took it, frowning. The handwriting was unfamiliar. She opened it and read the contents, her frown deepening. Rowan appeared in the doorway. What is it? She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it, his expression darkening with each line. It was from Caleb Durham. The man who'd abandoned her 6 months ago was asking to meet, and he was in Cheyenne. The letter sat on the table between them like an accusation. Eliza stared at it, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. After everything, after the mountains, the cabin, the bandits, the fire, this felt almost absurd, like a bad joke the universe was playing on her. Rowan's jaw was tight. You don't have to meet him. I know. So don't. Eliza picked up the letter again, reading it one more time. Caleb's handwriting was neat, almost apologetic in its careful loops. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to make things right. What could he possibly say that would matter now? Rowan asked. Nothing. Probably nothing. She set the letter down. But I think I need to hear it anyway. Why? Because 6 months ago, this letter would have meant everything to me. I would have read it and forgiven him instantly, would have believed whatever excuse he gave. She looked at Rowan. I want to see who I am now when I look at him. I want to know if any part of me is still that desperate woman who stepped off the stagecoach. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. And if you are? Then I'll deal with it. But I don't think I am. He nodded slowly. You want me to come with you? No. This is something I need to do alone. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock at the restaurant where she and Rowan had eaten weeks ago. Eliza dressed carefully, choosing her practical clothes, the same ones she'd worn in the mountains. She braided her hair simply, the way she'd learned to do when there was work to be done and no time for vanity. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone she barely recognized from 6 months ago. Sun-weathered skin, calloused hands, eyes that had seen violence and survived it. She walked to the restaurant alone, her spine straight, her steps measured. Caleb was already there, sitting at a corner table. He stood when he saw her, his expression shifting through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been regret. He looked different from the man she'd imagined from his letters. Smaller somehow, softer around the edges. His clothes were expensive but ill-fitting, like he'd recently gained weight. There was something about him that seemed diminished, though she couldn't quite name what it was. Eliza. He gestured to the chair across from him. Thank you for coming. She sat without speaking, studying him. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. There were dark circles under his eyes. He cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. You look different. I am different. Yes, I can see that. He fidgeted with his cup. I owe you an explanation. You owe me nothing, but I'm willing to listen. He seemed taken aback by that. Then he began talking, the words tumbling out like he'd rehearsed them but couldn't quite remember the order. He'd gotten cold feet, he said. The ranch had been failing, debts piling up faster than he could manage. He'd panicked, sold everything in a hurry for less than it was worth, and run to California to start over. By the time he'd realized his mistake, weeks had passed. He'd been too ashamed to write, too afraid she'd reject him, too proud to admit he'd made such a catastrophic error. But I've done well in California, he said, leaning forward eagerly. I have a business now, a dry goods store. It's small, but it's profitable. And I have a house, a real house with 2 floors and a garden. I can give you the life I promised, better than I promised, actually. Eliza listened without interrupting. She watched the way his eyes darted around the room, never quite meeting hers, the way his hands moved constantly, unable to be still. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Why now? She asked finally. Why come back after 6 months? Because I heard about you, about what happened in the mountains, about the fight with the bandits. He reached across the table toward her hand, though he didn't quite touch it. And I realized I'd been a fool, that I'd lost someone remarkable, someone who could have been an asset to my business, my life. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. The word asset hung in the air between them. Eliza felt something click into place, a clarity she hadn't quite had before. You didn't lose me, Caleb. You never had me. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. You had an idea of me. A woman who needed saving, who would be grateful for whatever scraps of stability you offered. Someone who would work in your store and keep your house, and ask for nothing in return. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. His face fell. Eliza, I know I made mistakes, but I'm offering you security, comfort, a position in society. What more could you want? A life that's mine, not one someone else designed for me. That's foolish talk. What kind of life can you have up in those mountains? Living like a savage, barely surviving, with a man who… He stopped himself, but the damage was done. With a man who what? Eliza's voice went cold. Caleb backtracked quickly. I just mean you deserve better. Someone established, someone respectable. Someone who sees me as an asset to his business? She stood. This isn't about your mistakes. It's about the fact that you're offering me something I don't want and calling it a favor. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice rising slightly. You'll regret this when winter comes and you're freezing in some cabin, when you realize what you could have had. I already had a cabin. It burned down. And I'd choose that burned cabin and everything that came with it over your comfortable house any day. She picked up her bag. I didn't come here for an apology or an explanation. I came here to prove something to myself. What? That I've moved past needing anything from you. She met his eyes steadily. I hope you find happiness in California, Caleb. I really do. Find someone who wants what you're offering, but it won't be me. It will never be me. She walked out before he could respond, feeling lighter with each step. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Eliza stood on the boardwalk for a moment, breathing deeply, letting the weight of the past finally slide off her shoulders. Rowan was waiting across the street, leaning against a post. He straightened when he saw her. How'd it go? Exactly how it needed to. She crossed the street to him. He offered me his life in California. A store, a house, security. Rowan's expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders tense slightly. And I told him no. She took his hand. Because I already have everything I want. The tension left his body. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He pulled her close, right there on the street, and kissed her. Eliza heard a few gasps from passers-by, but she didn't care. Let them stare. Let them gossip. When they broke apart, she was smiling. Come on, I want to show you something. She led him to the edge of town, to a small rise that overlooked the valley. From here you could see the mountains in the distance, snow-capped and eternal, stretching across the horizon like a promise. I've been thinking, she said, about what comes next. And I think we should go back. Not to the cabin site, somewhere new. Deeper in the mountains, somewhere no one will bother us. Somewhere we can build exactly the life we want without anyone's judgment or expectations. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains. That's a hard life, Eliza. You know that better than anyone now. Harder than what you just turned down. I do. But it's also the only life where I feel like myself. She turned to face him. I'm not afraid of hard work. I'm not afraid of isolation or danger or any of it. What I'm afraid of is becoming someone I'm not just to fit in somewhere I don't belong. He looked at her with something close to awe. You're sure? Because once we go deeper in, we might not come back to town for months at a time. Maybe longer. It'll just be us and whatever we can build with our hands. I'm sure. Are you? I've never been more sure of anything. He paused. But I want to do this right. I want to marry you first, properly. So when we disappear into those mountains, you're my wife in the eyes of the law and everyone else. Eliza felt her heart skip. You're proposing? I'm proposing. I don't have a ring, don't have much of anything really, but I'm offering you my life, whatever that's worth. It's worth everything. She kissed him again, slower this time. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. They spent the next week preparing. Rowan sold some equipment to raise money for supplies, tools, seeds, ammunition, fabric for clothing. Eliza worked odd jobs around town, taking any work she could find. She mended clothes for Mrs. Cartwright, helped at the general store, even did laundry for the boarding house guests. The money came slowly, but it came. People talked, of course. They always did. The woman who'd turned down Caleb Durham's offer of comfort and respectability to marry a mountain tracker and disappear into the wilderness. Some called her crazy, others called her brave. Most just shook their heads and whispered. Eliza found she didn't care anymore. Let them whisper, let them judge. Their opinions had no power over her. On the fourth day, she was hanging laundry behind the boarding house when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to find 3 women standing there, including the one who'd criticized her months ago in the general store. Eliza straightened, ready for confrontation, but the woman's expression wasn't hostile. It was uncertain, almost shy. Miss Thornfield, we wanted to talk to you. About? About what you're doing. Marrying Rowan Hale. Going back to the mountains. The woman glanced at her companions, then continued. Some of us have been talking about how you've made your own choices, built your own life. One of the other women, younger, spoke up. My husband wants me to work in his brother's store. I hate it there, but he says we need the money. I've been too afraid to say no. The third woman nodded. My father wants me to marry a man twice my age because he has land. I don't love him. I'm not sure I even like him, but everyone says I should be grateful for the offer. Eliza looked at them, understanding dawning. And you're telling me this because? Because you said no, the first woman said, to Caleb Durham, to security, to what everyone expected of you. And you survived, more than survived. You're thriving. I don't know about thriving, Eliza said quietly. I've lost everything I built. I'm starting over with nothing. But you're doing it on your own terms, the young woman said. That's what matters. Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke carefully. I can't tell you what to do with your lives, but I can tell you what I learned. Fear is a terrible reason to make a choice, and other people's expectations are an even worse one. But what if we fail, the third woman asked. What if we say no and end up alone and struggling? You might, I did at first. Eliza hung another piece of laundry. But I'd rather struggle building the life I want than succeed at living someone else's version of my life. The women were quiet, absorbing this. Thank you, the first woman said finally. And I'm sorry for what I said to you before. You didn't deserve that. No, I didn't. But I understand why you said it. We're all taught to fear women who make different choices, taught to tear them down so we don't have to face our own fears. After they left, Eliza stood there for a moment, thinking about how strange it was to have become someone other women looked to for courage. She didn't feel particularly courageous. She felt scared most of the time, uncertain, constantly questioning whether she was making the right choices. But maybe that was what courage actually was. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. On their last night in Cheyenne, Sheriff Dawson found them at the boarding house. Got some news, he said, his expression grim. That bandit leader, the one with the scar. He was spotted 2 days' ride from here trying to rob a stagecoach. A deputy named Mills shot him when he went for his gun. He's dead. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. You're certain? Saw the body myself before they buried him. He won't be troubling anyone again. Dawson paused. Thought you'd want to know. Close that chapter. After Dawson left, Rowan looked at her. How do you feel? Relieved, but also, I don't know, it doesn't change what happened, doesn't bring back what we lost. No, but it means we can move forward without looking over our shoulders. No one's hunting us. No one's waiting to burn down what we build. Just nature and weather and all the regular ways the mountains try to kill you, Eliza said with a slight smile. Exactly. The normal dangers. That night they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sun set over the town. Mrs. Cartwright brought them coffee and sat down with them, her face thoughtful. You two heading out tomorrow? At first light, Rowan confirmed. The older woman was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee. I've seen a lot of people come through this town.
Most of them are running from something or chasing something they'll never catch, dreams that don't belong to them, lives someone else told them they should want. She looked at Eliza. But you two, you're different. You're not running. You're choosing. What's the difference? Eliza asked. All the difference in the world, dear. Running is about fear. It's about trying to escape your past or your problems or yourself. But choosing, that's about knowing yourself well enough to pick the life you actually want, not the one everyone tells you you should have. Mrs. Cartwright paused. Most people never learn that. They spend their whole lives living for other people's approval, other people's expectations. They die without ever knowing who they really were. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for everything. For giving me a place to stay when I first arrived. For not judging me too harshly when everyone else did. Oh, I judged you plenty, Mrs. Cartwright said with a slight smile. But I also recognized something in you that reminded me of myself at your age. A stubbornness, a refusal to accept what everyone said was your lot in life. What did you do? Eliza asked. When you were my age. I ran a saloon in Denver. A scandalous thing for a woman to do back then. Still is, in many ways. But I made good money and lived life on my own terms until I decided I was tired of the noise and the chaos. Sold it and came here to run a respectable boarding house. She chuckled. Though some would say that's not respectable either, catering to drifters and questionable types. You never married? Once. Briefly. To a man who thought he could tame me, make me into a proper wife. Mrs. Cartwright's expression hardened. He learned otherwise. I left him with nothing but a note and never looked back. Rowan raised his coffee cup. To not being tamed. Mrs. Cartwright clinked her cup against his. To choosing your own damn life. They drank to that as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The next morning, before they left, there was one more visit Eliza needed to make. She went to the small cemetery on the edge of town and stood in front of 2 graves marked with simple wooden crosses. The bandits they'd killed defending the cabin. She didn't know their names, didn't know their stories or what had led them to that life. But they'd been people once, with hopes and fears and choices that had brought them to that clearing in the mountains. I don't forgive you, she said quietly. You made choices that hurt people, that destroyed what we built. But I also won't carry you with me anymore. You're done. This is done. She turned and walked away, feeling lighter. Rowan was waiting with the horses. They'd packed light, just supplies, tools, weapons, and a few personal items. Everything they owned fit in 4 saddlebags. They rode out of Cheyenne at dawn, the town still mostly asleep. A few early risers watched them go, but no one called out or waved. That was fine. They weren't leaving for anyone else's approval. The journey took 6 days this time. They traveled slowly, carefully, looking for the right place. Rowan knew these mountains better than anyone, and he led them deeper than Eliza had ever gone, into territory few people ever saw. The landscape changed gradually. The trees grew taller, older, their trunks thick as houses. The air became thinner, crisper. They saw elk and mountain goats, eagles circling overhead. Once they spotted a bear in the distance, massive and dark against the snow. This is real wilderness, Rowan said. No one comes out here except maybe trappers, and even they don't venture this far usually. Is that good or bad? Depends on how you look at it. Good, because we'll have privacy and safety. Bad, because if something goes wrong, there's no help coming. Then we don't let things go wrong. On the 6th day, they found it. A valley sheltered on 3 sides by steep ridges, with a creek running through the center. The water was clear and cold, fed by snowmelt from higher elevations. There were stands of pine and aspen, flat ground for building, and a natural meadow that would be perfect for a garden. Rowan stopped his horse and looked around. This is it. If you want it. Eliza dismounted and walked through the meadow, feeling the grass brush against her legs. She could see it already, a cabin near the creek, but high enough to avoid spring flooding. A garden here, taking advantage of the southern exposure, space for animals, for storage, for expansion, if they needed it. The valley felt protected, hidden, like a secret the mountains were sharing. It's perfect, she said. They camped that night in the meadow, building a fire and cooking the last of their fresh supplies. Tomorrow they'd start building. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, they just sat together under more stars than Eliza had ever seen, listening to the creek and the wind and the sounds of the wilderness around them. Are you scared?
Rowan asked. Terrified, Eliza admitted, but also excited. Is that strange?
No, it's honest.
He poked at the fire with a stick. I've lived in the mountains for 15 years, and I'm still scared sometimes. Of injury, of starvation, of all the ways nature can kill you if you're not careful, but I'd rather be scared here than safe somewhere I don't belong. That's exactly how I feel. They were quiet for a while. Then Eliza spoke again. Tell me about the first winter you spent alone, after your family lost the ranch. Rowan was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he began talking, his voice low. I was angry. At my father for the bad decisions. At my brothers for scattering instead of fighting to keep what we had. At myself for not being strong enough or smart enough to fix it. He stared into the fire. I came to the mountains because I wanted to punish myself. Figured if I could survive alone in the harshest place I could find, maybe I'd prove something. To myself? To them? I don't know. What happened?
I almost died. Multiple times.
Fell through ice, nearly starved. Got lost in a blizzard and spent 3 days in a snow cave waiting it out. He looked at her. But I survived. And somewhere in that survival, the anger burned itself out. I realized I didn't want revenge or redemption. I just wanted peace. Did you find it?
I thought I did. For years, I thought being alone was the same as being at peace.
He reached over and took her hand. But then I met you and I realized what I'd actually found was isolation. Peace came later. With you. Eliza felt tears slip down her cheeks. I love you. I don't think I've said that clearly enough. You've shown it. That matters more. I want to say it anyway. I love you. Not because you saved me or gave me a place to go, but because you saw me when I couldn't see myself. And because you let me see you too. He pulled her close, and they sat like that until the fire burned down to embers and the night grew cold. They started building the next day. It was slower this time, more deliberate. They'd learned from their mistakes with the first cabin. This one would be stronger, better positioned, with multiple escape routes and clear sight lines in every direction. The work was brutal. Eliza's hands, which had finally started to heal, blistered and bled again. Her back ached constantly. There were days when she woke up so sore she could barely move, but she didn't quit, because something had changed in her that she couldn't name. She'd discovered a kind of strength that had nothing to do with never struggling and everything to do with struggling and continuing anyway. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into the building, they took a break and sat by the creek. Eliza dangled her feet in the icy water, wincing at the cold. I keep thinking about those women who came to talk to me, she said, the ones who wanted to know how I found the courage to say no to Caleb. What about them? I wonder if they did it. If they said no to the things they didn't want. Does it matter? I suppose not. Their choices are theirs to make. She was quiet for a moment. But I hope they did. I hope they found whatever version of this they needed. This being? Freedom, agency, the ability to build their own lives instead of accepting the ones handed to them. Rowan smiled. You've gotten philosophical. The mountains do that to a person. Too much time to think. They worked through the summer, racing against the coming winter. The cabin took shape slowly, walls rising, a roof going on, windows fitted with shutters that could be barred from inside. They dug a root cellar and lined it with stones from the creek. They built a smokehouse for preserving meat and a lean-to for the animals they'd eventually acquire. By late August, the cabin was finished. It wasn't fancy, just one room with a sleeping loft and a massive stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the coldest months. But it was solid and strong and theirs. They stood back to admire it, tired and satisfied and covered in sawdust. What do you think? Rowan asked. I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. That night they made dinner together in their new home. Venison stew and bread Eliza had learned to bake in a Dutch oven over the fire. They ate on the porch they'd built, watching the sun set over the mountains. Do you ever regret it? Eliza asked, bringing me up here instead of leaving me in town. No, do you regret coming? Not for a second, not even when I'm exhausted or scared or wondering if we're crazy for trying this. We probably are crazy. Probably. But I'd rather be crazy and happy than sane and miserable. They were quiet for a while, listening to the creek and the wind in the trees. Then Rowan spoke. I want to marry you, properly. Not just because it's expected or because it makes sense,
but because I love you and I want it to be official, real, in every way. Eliza's breath caught. Even though there's no one up here to know it or care? Especially because of that. This isn't for anyone else. It's for us. When?
We'll go down to town, make it official with the law and witnesses. Then come back here and live however we want.
She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds.
I'm ready now. They rode to Cheyenne the following week. The trip felt different this time, not like an obligation or an escape, but like a celebration. They were going to make permanent what they'd already built in their hearts. Mrs. Cartwright cried when they told her. Sheriff Dawson offered to stand witness. Even Fletcher from the general store gave them a discount on supplies for the wedding. The ceremony was simple, held in the sheriff's office on a Tuesday afternoon with just a handful of people present. Eliza wore the same practical dress she'd worn in the mountains, though she'd cleaned it and Mrs. Cartwright had added some simple embroidery at the collar. Rowan wore clean clothes but looked uncomfortable in them, his broad shoulders straining against the borrowed jacket. When the preacher asked if she took Rowan as her husband, Eliza didn't hesitate. I do. When he asked Rowan the same question, the answer was just as certain. I do. They exchanged simple gold bands that Rowan had commissioned from the town's blacksmith. The metal was rough, imperfect, with visible hammer marks, but they were solid and strong, like them. You may kiss the bride, the preacher said. Rowan pulled Eliza close and kissed her, and she heard Mrs. Cartwright sniffle loudly. When they broke apart, the small group applauded. They were married. Afterward, Mrs. Cartwright insisted on hosting a small meal at the boarding house. It was modest, roasted chicken, potatoes, carrots, and a pie she'd baked that morning. But it felt like a feast. People Eliza had never spoken to came up to congratulate them. Some seemed genuinely happy. Others were clearly just curious about the woman who'd survived the mountains and married the reclusive tracker. A few whispered behind their hands, scandalized that she'd chosen this life over Caleb's comfortable offer. Eliza didn't care. She smiled and thanked them all, and felt nothing but contentment. As the evening wound down, Tom Hendricks approached with his wife, a sturdy woman named Sarah with kind eyes and strong hands. Wanted to thank you, Tom said to Eliza, for riding with us against those bandits. You showed real courage. Sarah nodded, and I wanted to tell you something. There are a lot of women in this territory who look at you and see possibility. See that life doesn't have to be what everyone tells them it should be. Eliza felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. I'm just living the way that makes sense to me. That's exactly my point, Sarah said. Most women never get to do that. They live for their fathers, then their husbands, then their children. They die without ever knowing who they might have been on their own terms. She squeezed Eliza's hand. Keep doing what you're doing, and know that some of us are watching and learning. After they left, the young woman who'd spoken to Eliza weeks ago about her father's arranged marriage approached shyly. I told him no, she said quietly. To the marriage. He was furious, told me I'd regret it, that I'd end up alone and destitute. What did you do? I moved in with my aunt. She runs a seamstress shop and needed help. I'm learning the trade. The woman's face brightened. It's hard work, but it's mine, my choice. I'm proud of you, Eliza said. That takes real courage. I learned it from you. After the woman left, Rowan came up beside Eliza. You're making an impression. I'm just being myself. That's what makes it powerful. They left Cheyenne the next morning as husband and wife. The ride back to the valley felt like coming home in the deepest sense. Not just returning to a place, but to the life they'd chosen and built together. Over the following months, they settled into a rhythm. Rowan taught Eliza how to track game through snow, how to read weather patterns in the clouds, how to predict when storms would hit. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits, how to preserve meat for winter, how to make tools from materials they found in the forest. Eliza taught Rowan how to let someone in completely, how to share the weight of responsibility instead of carrying it alone, how to build a partnership instead of just surviving in parallel. She showed him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that sharing joy made it sweeter while sharing pain made it bearable. They fought sometimes, sharp arguments about stupid things, born from exhaustion or fear or just the stress of living in isolation. Once, they didn't speak for 2 days after a disagreement about how to store grain. Another time, Rowan stormed out after Eliza criticized his hunting technique, and she had to track him down and apologize. But they always worked through it, refusing to let resentment fester or silence grow into distance. "We can't afford to stay angry," Rowan said after one argument. "Up here, we're all we have. If we lose each other, we lose everything." "Then we don't lose each other," Eliza replied. Winter came hard and early, testing everything they'd built. The first snow fell in October, a light dusting that melted by noon. But by mid-November, serious storms started rolling in, dumping feet of snow and sending temperatures plummeting. There were nights when the cold was so brutal that Eliza wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. Nights when the wind howled like something alive, trying to tear the cabin apart. Nights when she woke up shivering despite the fire and all their blankets. But then morning would come, and Rowan would have the fire roaring, coffee brewing, and they'd face another day together. And slowly, she began to realize something. This was happiness. Not the easy kind where everything was comfortable and safe, but the earned kind forged through hardship and choice, and refusing to give up even when it would have been easier to quit. One evening in late December, as they sat by the fire, Eliza spoke. "I've been thinking about my mother." Rowan looked up from the knife he was sharpening. "Yeah? She married for security. Chose a man she didn't love because he could provide for her. When my father died and she remarried so quickly, I was furious. I thought she was weak, disloyal." Eliza stared into the flames. "But now I understand. She did what she thought she had to do to survive. She didn't have other options, or at least she didn't think she did." "But you chose differently." "I did. Because I learned something she never had the chance to learn, or maybe never had the courage to learn." "What's that?" "That survival isn't the same as living. That there's a difference between existing and choosing, and that sometimes the hardest path is actually the one that sets you free." She looked at him. She was trapped by her own fear and by what everyone told her a woman should be. "I refuse to be trapped that way." Rowan set down his knife and pulled her close. "You think she would have understood that?" "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not." Eliza leaned into him. "But I hope wherever she is, she knows I don't judge her anymore. I just wish she'd had the chance to make different choices." "You're making them for her in a way, breaking the pattern." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally living as myself instead of as who I was told to be." Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow in patches and revealing green underneath. Eliza planted a larger garden this time, with seeds she'd saved from last year and new ones they'd bought in town. Potatoes, carrots, beans, squash, herbs. She worked in the dirt for hours each day, her hands moving through soil that was beginning to feel like home. One afternoon in April, while she was planting, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning against the fence post, but it was just Sam Weaver, the tracker, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. "Thought you might need some things," he called out as he dismounted. Rowan emerged from the cabin, surprised but pleased. "Sam, didn't expect to see you up here. Hell of a ride. Was passing through the area. Figured I'd stop by." He glanced at Eliza, a slight smile on his weathered face. "See how married life was treating you two." They invited him to stay for dinner, and he accepted gratefully. Over venison stew and fresh bread, Sam told them news from the territory. The bandits' trial had concluded months ago. All 3 prisoners had been hanged. The ranches that had been attacked were rebuilding and recovering. Life was slowly returning to normal. "Folks in town talk about you sometimes," Sam said to Eliza. "The woman who fought bandits and disappeared into the mountains like a ghost." "Let them talk. They tell your story like it's a legend. Some of it's probably not even true anymore. Heard one version where you killed 5 bandits single-handed. Another where you're some kind of wilderness prophet living off the land." Eliza smiled slightly. "Stories have a way of changing to fit what people need them to be." "What do you think your story is?" Sam asked seriously. She thought about it for a long moment. "It's about a woman who thought she needed someone else to give her life meaning and permission, and then discovered she could create both herself." Sam nodded slowly. "That's a good story. Better than the legend versions." He stayed 2 days, helping them repair part of the roof that had been damaged by heavy snow. On the morning of the 3rd day, he prepared to leave. "I'll check on you again when I'm in the area," he said, mounting his horse. "If you need anything, leave word in town. I pass through every few months." "Thank you, Sam," Eliza said, "for everything." After he'd gone, Eliza and Rowan stood in the clearing, watching the spot where he'd disappeared into the trees.
It's strange, Eliza said, how quiet it is after having someone else here. Too quiet? No, just different. Makes me realize how much our world has shrunk to just us.
Is that a problem?
I don't think so. As long as we don't forget there's a world beyond this valley. Hard to forget when Sam shows up every few months with news and supplies. They fell back into their routine. Days were spent hunting, fishing, maintaining the cabin and garden. Evenings were for cooking together, talking by the fire, planning for the future.
Sometimes they made love slowly in the loft, the moonlight streaming through the window. Other times it was quick and urgent, born from the simple joy of being alive and together. Life wasn't always easy. There were setbacks and failures. A late frost killed half the garden in May. Rowan twisted his ankle badly in June and was laid up for 2 weeks. In July, a bear got into their smokehouse and destroyed a month's worth of preserved meat. But they handled each problem as it came, working together, never placing blame. One evening in late summer, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Eliza spoke. "Do you think we'll always live like this?" "I don't know. Does it matter?" "No, I suppose it doesn't." She was quiet for a moment. "I used to think life was about reaching certain milestones. Marriage, children, a house, security, checking boxes that proved you were successful. And now? Now I think life is about the moments between the milestones, the daily work, the quiet mornings, the hard afternoons, the evenings like this one." She gestured at the valley around them. "All of this. This is the life, not some destination we're working toward." "When did you get so wise?" "When I stopped trying to be what everyone else wanted and started paying attention to what actually mattered." As autumn approached and they began preparing for another winter, Eliza realized something that made her pause in the middle of chopping wood. She was happy. Truly, deeply happy. Not because life was perfect or easy, not because she had everything she thought she wanted when she first stepped off that stagecoach, but because she had built something real with her own hands and heart. Because she had chosen this life deliberately, with full knowledge of what it required. Because she had found someone who saw her not as she appeared, but as she truly was, and loved her anyway. That evening, she told Rowan what she'd realized. "I'm happy," she said simply. He looked at her, understanding in his pale eyes. "Me too. Even with all the hardship, all the uncertainty, because of it maybe, I spent 15 years alone in these mountains thinking that was peace, but it was really just absence, the absence of complications, of conflict, of connection." He took her hand. "You brought all those things back into my life, and yeah, it's harder sometimes, but it's also fuller, richer, real in a way it never was before." Years would pass, seasons would change. The valley would see snow and sun and everything in between. They would face more challenges, a winter so harsh they almost didn't survive it, a summer drought that nearly killed the garden, illness that struck them both and left them weak for weeks. But they would face it all together. They would grow old in that valley, their hair graying, their hands becoming more scarred and weathered with each passing year. Eventually, they would train younger people, a few brave souls who ventured into the mountains seeking the same freedom Eliza had found. But that was far in the future. For now, Eliza Thornfield, now Eliza Hale, stood in the valley she'd chosen, beside the man she'd chosen, living the life she'd chosen. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything, because she'd finally learned the lesson that had been waiting for her all along, the truth that changed everything. Life wasn't about finding the perfect circumstances or the perfect person or the perfect place. It was about choosing what mattered to you and building something worth keeping, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. She'd come west looking for a husband, for security, for someone else to make her life make sense. Instead, she'd found herself. She'd found strength she didn't know she possessed, courage that had been buried under years of being told she was weak, a capacity for survival and joy and choice that surprised even her. And yes, she'd found love too, but not the kind she'd expected, not the comfortable, safe kind that asked nothing of her. She'd found the kind of love that challenged her to be better, stronger, more honest, the kind that demanded partnership, not dependence, the kind that was forged in fire and hardship, and the simple choice to keep showing up for each other, day after difficult day. As the sun set over the mountains one final time in this chapter of their story, Eliza and Rowan stood together on the porch of the cabin they'd built with their own hands. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. The silence said everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new reasons to doubt or fear or question. But they would face it together. Not because they needed each other to survive, but because they had chosen each other freely, honestly, with full knowledge of what that choice meant. And that choice, that daily, deliberate choice to build a life together on their own terms, that was the story that mattered. Not the one about the abandoned bride or the desperate woman or the victim of circumstance, but the one about the woman who refused to stay broken, who learned that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about getting back up, again and again and again, until finally you realized you'd been strong all along. You just needed the courage to prove it to yourself. And now, standing in a valley hidden deep in the mountains, with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin and a heart full of hard-won peace, Eliza knew exactly who she was. She was a woman who had saved herself, who had built a life worth living, who had chosen freedom over comfort, truth over pretense, authentic struggle over false security. And she would never go back. Not to who she'd been, not to what she'd left behind, only forward, into whatever came next, with courage, with purpose, and with the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged.